First, though, news on the vaccine front. The federal government committed $500 million for projects to help beat the pandemic. That includes building facilities to produce vaccines here at home. Canada currently relies on other countries for vaccine doses. So how soon could that change? François-Philippe Champagne is the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. He's with us from Shawinigan, Quebec. Hi, Minister Champagne. Good to see you again. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Minister, you and the Prime Minister announced more than $500 million in funding today for research projects across the country. I want to hone in on one area, though, vaccine manufacturing. The Prime Minister said today that the investment that you announced will help create a program to speed up vaccine production. Given the lack of manufacturing capacity in this country, though, right now during the pandemic, is this too little too late?
Well, this is an addition to everything we've done. I mean, you remember, the pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization, if I recall, on the 11th of March, 2020. And within days of that, we had already put $200 million to help with biomanufacturing in Canada. And within 30 days, we added a $600 million. So basically like $1 billion within the time that the pandemic was declared. But obviously, we all know as Canadians that we started from a very low base. We know that pharmaceutical companies had left the country. This goes back to almost the 1980s for different reasons, previous government policies, different supply chain. But I think what you're seeing in the world now, Vashi, and what I've seen as Foreign Affairs Minister before, is that global supply chain are becoming regional, that people put more emphasis on resiliency than efficiency. So what we're trying to do is obviously to support domestic production, and we've done that with pillars, whether it's Abcellera in Vancouver or Medicago in Quebec City. But at the same time, my mission is to talk to as many people as possible around the world to say, how can we ensure critical supply from adjuvants to lipids to fill and finish to vaccine, so that whatever may come next, we will be much better prepared and resilient as a country.
It's interesting that you talk about the place at which Canada started when it comes to biomanufacturing. And I just want to zone in on that for a second with you, Minister, because you put it a lot more diplomatically, for example, than other people in your position have, or even the Prime Minister, who instead said this was all the previous government's fault. You rightly point out that it goes back a number of decades. And to be fair, your government has been in power since 2015. So you had a number of years to at least begin scaling up production to some degree in this country, but you didn't. Do you regret that? Do you bear some responsibility as a government for not doing more earlier?
Well, I would say we've been the government who invested massively in science. And I mean, if you've seen since 2016, it's about $10 billion. But one thing that your viewers would agree is that if you look at the big challenges of the world, whether it's the COVID pandemic or climate change, science, technology, and innovation will be key. So clearly, we're going to continue to invest. We have been investing because our programs were not necessarily well designed for that. When we came in office, we made sure that pharmaceuticals could tap into these funds. But certainly what we're doing, and I think the world, Vashi, to be honest, having talked to colleagues around the world, I think that everyone wished they would have been a bit more prepared with respect to the scale that we've seen with the COVID pandemic. But the good thing now is not only we have vaccines coming for Canadians, but we are rebuilding that capacity, so we will have the resiliency that's needed. And let's be clear. When you hear people who make vaccines, I spoke to one CEO recently who was telling, there's like 100 or 200 components in a vaccine coming from something like 50 manufacturers from 19 countries. So those are very complex. But what I'm trying to do, in addition to the effort of obviously buying these vaccines, which we have and which Canadians will have access, is at the same time is to be better prepared whatever may come next. And you saw Novavax, which shows Canada, and you can rest assured that we're talking to everyone to make sure that we build that resiliency here at home.
And certainly I take your point on all of that, and I'm sure Canadians appreciate the investment that your government, as you say, has made in science. But with great respect, it doesn't exactly address the substance of my question. When you highlight, for example, other jurisdictions which hope they could have also had more capacity. I mean, there are many other jurisdictions that do have that capacity. We're seeing our neighbors, for example, to the south, where the rate of vaccination at this point, because of their ability to manufacture domestically, is outpacing us. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case always, but certainly we are able to see that right now. Once again, does your government bear some responsibility for not increasing that capacity earlier in your mandate?
Well, I would say what we're responsible for is to have followed science and invest heavily in science. I mean, we all have seen countries who have followed science had better outcome. I would say, Vashi, if you look at other countries, we started with different bases. I mean, people have quoted me, for example, the United Kingdom on a number of occasions. But, when you look at the country when this started, we had two facilities who could manufacture vaccine in volumes. You have GSK in Quebec City, which is already doing the influenza vaccine. And you have Sanofi Pasteur, which is the old Connaught laboratory in Toronto, which is doing polio and other vaccines for Canada that are much needed and around the world. So we had some capacity, but what we needed is the right capacity for the new type of vaccine, the mRNA vaccines. And that's why now we are making, I would say, record investments. And I think Canadians will take a very different view 6 months from now, not only looking that people will have been vaccinated by September, but also that we're building that resiliency and the key components, whether you're talking about adjuvants, lipids, everything that needs to go into a vaccine. My mission is to try to entice these companies to onshore, if I may say, in Canada. So not only we can serve the domestic market, but become a platform, obviously, for export around the world.
And once again, respectfully, I take your point on mRNA technology and how new it was. But respectfully, the other vaccines in production are not all mRNA. And again, my point was around whether or not there could have been some increased capacity earlier. But I do want to move on and just ask you, when it comes to what you are saying now, 6 months from now, let's say, will increased domestic capacity to manufacture these vaccines have any impact on the overall timeline by which people in this country can expect to be vaccinated? Yesterday, we heard President Biden talk about Americans getting vaccinated or being able to be all vaccinated by the end of May. Today, the Prime Minister opened the door to the possibility that in Canada it could come sooner than the end of September. Will that be the case, and will domestic manufacturing have anything to do with it, or will it come too late?
But we had some good news today. I mean, the Prime Minister said it. We're having nearly 1 million vaccines arriving this week in Canada, 500,000 today from AstraZeneca. We're on our way to exceed our target of 6 million by March. I think biomanufacturing, I mean, we've invested in different domestic, Medicago in Quebec City is one, for example, where they're in phase 3 clinical trials, and we've been supporting heavily, just like Vido in Saskatchewan and others, Epsilora in Vancouver. But I think the fact that Novavax has selected Canada, because when I spoke with the CEO, just to give a sense of perspective to your viewers, they operate in 7-8 countries around the world. They chose Canada with the facility in Royalmount in Montreal with the National Research Council. So that's going to, we say end of construction by the summer. We have a couple of months to be able to commission and to get the certification by Health Canada to be able to be in production by the end of the year. I don't know what may come next. I think there's a lot of discussions about variants and other things, but one thing is sure, Vashi, is that I'm doing everything I can to make sure not only we expand, but we accelerate all these projects that have been on the table to make sure that whatever comes next, we would better be prepared. And if we can contribute to that, certainly we will be having domestic production capacity by the end of the year.
By the end of the year, though. Prior to that, has there been a formal ask from your government to the Biden administration if they are done with their own vaccination program at the end of May? Have you asked, will they supply us with some vaccine manufactured there?
Well, the Prime Minister was answering that question. I think with the discussion with President Biden, he said that both leaders understand that the only way to be protected is if everyone is protected. So these discussions will always be...
That's all he said, though, respectfully. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that there has been a formal request for that?
Well, I would say what he said this morning was that, the leaders will be engaging. The president has been clear, just like the Prime Minister, that we have domestic needs to satisfy first. But certainly these discussions will be ongoing. And we've seen our colleagues in the European Union, for example, when it comes to export restriction, allowing vaccines to come to Canada. And I can assure you that the efforts we're making now to onshore, to bring more manufacturing and some key components that goes into vaccines, this is all part of the resiliency that Canadians will want to see in our country.
Okay, Minister Champagne, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, as always.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hi. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.